Ladies and gentlemen, I have been conversing with several sovereign citizens on various videos I've released about things sovereign citizens consistently get wrong. And boy, wouldn't you know it, they have this terrible habit of using the exact same arguments as every other sovereign citizen, while also being mad that I claim all sovereign citizens are bad at law. It's part of the job description, folks. If you were good at law, you'd know better. Inevitably, when their arguments fail to convince me, likely because I actually read and research the things they're trying to bamboozle me with, and a special shout out to some commenters who have done some incredible research to smack those sovereign citizens back down, they link videos so that someone else can sound stupid instead of them. And when I point out the same errors and the same information, they can feel like they aren't wrong because someone else was saying the thing that was wrong. The same thing that they were saying earlier that was proven wrong. Honestly, I don't believe they actually watch the videos they send me. It's a well-established fact that sovereign citizens just recycle each other's nonsense, trusting the person the nonsense came from to have done the research so that they don't have to. Doesn't matter. For the first time in a long time, a sovereign citizen sent me a video I hadn't seen before, and folks, it is fascinating. The video is of Andrew Napolitano, and wouldn't you know it, the name sounds a little familiar, so let's check on him real quick. Visiting law professor at Brooklyn Law School. Okay, that's actually ranked 81st out of 197 on U.S. News' list of best law schools. Not, the top, but certainly a strong middle. Former New Jersey Superior Court judge. Wow, that's actually pretty impressive. Former legal analyst on Fox News. Oh! You know what? That's actually where I know him from. He's the conspiracy theorist guy. Yes, he was booted from Fox News after he repeatedly claimed former President Obama had, while in office, used a British intelligence agency to spy on then-incoming, now former President Trump. Something Fox News has very clearly stated they were unable to establish in any way. Napolitano came back after all that blew over, which took a while after former President Trump echoed the claim, which became a bit of an international issue that is still lacking any evidence of accuracy, and Napolitano was booted again after multiple allegations of sexual assault against men. Now, I don't know if those allegations have any merit, but they shouldn't detract from his legal knowledge. Surely, I won't be able to poke any holes in any of his statements, right? There's no way that I, with less than a decade of law enforcement experience, should be able to call out a former Superior Court judge. Surely not. But let's find out.
The most unique of the 10 amendments is the 10th, because the first 9 talk about individual liberty and individual rights and how the government can't interfere with them. We know what these are: speech, self-defense, privacy, religion, travel.
Okay. Only took 18 seconds for him to be wrong. He mentioned the right to travel, a common sovereign citizen rallying cry, while listing individual liberties and rights granted by the Bill of Rights. Folks, the right to travel isn't in the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. You can pause this video and confirm that yourself. It isn't even expressly established in the Constitution. So, where does it come from? Well, technically it comes from the Articles of Confederation, which were the precursors to the Constitution. But that document stopped being a thing in 1789, when it was replaced by the Constitution. Now, fortunately for us, this has been, and continues to be, figured out by the courts of law, which tend to establish that 2 things protect the right to travel. First up is the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the Constitution. The first major connection to the right to travel, and that particular clause, came from Corfield versus Corio in 1823, a ruling from the Eastern Circuit of Pennsylvania. But the right to travel wasn't really touched on by the Supreme Court until 1867 with Crandall versus State of Nevada. And travel wasn't fully connected to the Privileges and Immunities Clause by the Supreme Court until 1869, thanks to Paul versus Virginia. The second thing protecting the right to travel is the 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868, which, among other things, ensured states cannot abridge the Federal Privileges and Immunities Clause, and, incidentally, made slavery illegal. Foreshadowing, but let's keep going.
The right to confront your accusers, the right to have a lawyer, the right to have an impartial judge, the right to due process.
We are 23 seconds in, and he says impartial judge instead of the right to an impartial jury. Surely that's just a simple mistake, so we're going to keep moving on.
The government can't take your property away. Just a little aside on that.
Okay, so 28 seconds in, he states the government can't take your property. That's not true. They can't unreasonably take it. For example, civil asset forfeiture laws allow the government to seize property believed to be involved in a crime. And yes, I know of the issues that have arisen from this. And no, this video is not about that. It's a long, complicated topic, and we've already taken this long to discuss 28 seconds of a video, so we're not going to touch on it today. The government can also force you to surrender your property by eminent domain, as long as that property is taken for public use and you are provided a fair compensation for it.
Jefferson argued that there should be no eminent domain. Jefferson argued that your property is yours. And the only way the government could get it is through voluntary exchange, not just because they're the big, bad government and they want your property for whatever reason.
37 seconds in, and we're learning Thomas Jefferson, founding father, president, man you see on nickels, didn't believe in eminent domain. But that's not what he believed. He argued, in defense of the Boston Tea Party and the American Revolution, that the King of England could not claim ownership of all land simply because, why not? Jefferson promoted the idea of allodial ownership, meaning that a person owns land as long as they occupy that land and can prevent others from taking it from them. This was a pretty popular idea at the time because there was a lot of land up for grabs if you ignore the fact that Native Americans were there. So why not just go out into the wilderness and build a house and live there and claim it as your own?
It's free real estate.
Contextually, Jefferson suggested that England couldn't just draw a circle on a map of land that English citizens had never been to and say, "That's mine now. You can't settle that land without a very difficult to acquire land grant." English representatives should, according to Jefferson, have to actually go to that area and acquire it through occupancy, and then issue or sell land grants. Of course, England was like, nah, which is why raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands is one of the grievances listed against King George in the Declaration of Independence. It's a small, obscure document. You've probably never heard of it. To summarize, Jefferson doesn't appear to have been against government acquiring private property. He was against the government claiming to possess property without being present to enforce that claim. Correct me if I'm wrong, with evidence please, but it doesn't really matter in the long run if I've missed some statement by Jefferson about eminent domain, because eminent domain is allowed by the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment is in the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is the thing that Napolitano claimed prohibits the government from taking your property. Kind of awkward.
And he lost that argument. The Fifth Amendment says there is eminent domain, but the government's got to pay you a fair market value for your property, and it has to be used for a public use.
So now the government can take your property? Got it.
We get to the 10th, and it is a truism. It basically says the powers not delegated in this Constitution to the government, to the new government, are retained by the states and the people respectively. That was there to assure that what was written down in the Constitution, those little pieces of sovereignty that each state gave away, could not be expanded upon by the feds.
No, the 10th Amendment is the federal government saying, well, if we didn't give ourselves the sole authority to do something, and we didn't say you couldn't have the authority to do something, well, go for it. Oh, what's that? You want to create your own laws? Heck, create your own state constitutions, why not? You just can't use those to try to override the federal constitution or federal laws. Maybe, if he was making more sense, I could further my argument by saying something like, I don't know, didn't the 15th, 19th, and 26th Amendment take away some of the state's authorities to determine who could or could not vote? And surely, congressional acts would make an appearance as well, but he's not making that much sense, so I'm going to save that argument for a rainy day.
And for the most part, for the first 75 years or so of this country, that was the law. Why? Because if a U.S. senator voted to give more power to Washington at the expense of the state, that senator would lose his job.
Well, maybe if 2/3 of the Senate voted to expel that senator.
And in fact, 7 U.S. senators were summarily recalled by their state legislatures because they did that.
All right, calm down, all three of you in the audience. U.S. senators cannot be recalled by a state. State senators can in some parts of the country, but not U.S. senators. Literally has never happened. Literally impossible without amending the Constitution. Yes, senators have been expelled, but there were more than 7 of them. The first was in 1787 because the senator engaged in a treasonous conspiracy to assist Great Britain with an invasion of Florida, which was owned by Spain at the time. 11 were expelled for supporting the Confederate secession in 1861, after a federal fort was attacked and seized by Confederate forces, which started the Civil War, although 1 was posthumously reversed. 3 more were expelled for similar reasons in 1862. Napolitano seems to be implying the 7 were recalled prior to the Civil War. So is he completely wrong, or is he just mostly wrong by confusing state senators with U.S. senators?
Well, after Lincoln waged war on half the country because they wanted to leave and be independent and not send tariff duties to Washington.
Speaking of Civil War, this is something Napolitano is known for. He makes a lot of claims about the Civil War that are provably wrong, to include the claim we see here, which is that Lincoln started the Civil War. He also claims that everything was great until the Civil War, which is not true. The North and South had been divided from the very beginning, with the South relying on slave labor for its economy and the North abolishing slavery from 1774 to 1804. This had always been an issue. And when Lincoln ran on the campaign promise that he wouldn't abolish slavery, some of you didn't know that, but he would prohibit slavery in any new territories, states started to secede. The secession of 11 states actually began before Lincoln was even in office, but the thing that really set things off was Fort Sumter in South Carolina. See, there were still federal installations in the states that had seceded, and Fort Sumter was running low on supplies. When Lincoln informed South Carolina he was sending unarmed supply ships to the fort, Confederate forces decided it was time to enforce their claims to the federal installations. The fort was attacked on April 12, 1861, and the Civil War began. You know, it kind of sounds like Lincoln didn't start the war. In fact, Confederate forces had already attacked a ship trying to supply Fort Sumter under the Buchanan presidency. Weird. This is well documented. Has been for a while. You would think Napolitano would be aware of this.
The people who took over the government after Lincoln had these crazy progressive ideas in their head. And one of those progressive ideas, which wouldn't see the light of day for 2 generations later, was that, you know what? We can't trust the states to send people to Washington. We have to get rid of the 10th Amendment. We want to be able to write whatever rules we want.
I have exactly zero context for this. Who exactly is trying to get rid of the 10th Amendment? Anyone? Does anyone know? I certainly don't.
They knew that they couldn't rescind the 10th Amendment. They knew that as part of the American value is the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. So they added an amendment to nullify the 10th. Question: can an amendment to the Constitution itself be unconstitutional? Answer: if it assaults the very basic values of the Constitution.
No. A major point of amendments is to change the existing Constitution. The basic values of the Constitution allowed slavery, and Jefferson himself owned 600 slaves over his lifetime. So, is the 14th Amendment unconstitutional? Should slavery still be allowed? No, it doesn't work that way. Now, here's a thought. If we're going to talk about what Thomas Jefferson believed, why don't we talk about his suggestion that the Constitution be rewritten every 20 years to best represent the new generation? Well, don't cite Thomas Jefferson to support your complaint that things change over time when that's literally what he wanted.
Remember that federal table, the people, the states as states, the country as a whole. The 16th Amendment said we don't trust the states to send senators anymore.
Oh my God. He's actually a pure sovereign citizen. This is rare. This is unexpected. The title of this video was a joke, saying, is this judge a sovereign citizen? He actually is. This is what the sovereign citizen movement originally looked like before it was, a whole bunch of nonsense about fringe on flags and the courtroom is a vessel on international waters. This is what it looked like. It was built on white supremacy and an aversion to the 16th Amendment income tax, among other things, but those were 2 of the main pillars. This judge is what the original sovereign citizen movement looked like. That's terrifying.
We're going to have the people elect them subject to the same political pressures, the same pressure groups, the same popular enthusiasm that the House of Representatives has. And from that time on, the states began losing more and more power because senators didn't represent the states as states. They represented the people who sent them there.
No. The 16th Amendment established a federal income tax. He's confusing the 16th Amendment, which allows a federal income tax that isn't based on population, with Section 2 of the 14th Amendment, which establishes state representation in the federal government based on population. I'm going to be real with you guys. I'm fairly certain this man is drunk.
That's why you'll see a senator from New York coming to California to campaign for campaign funds. He couldn't care less about the government of the state of New York. He just wants his own job and doesn't care where the money comes from. And things, of course, began to unravel from that point. The same progressive attitude that enacted the 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment, changing the way senators were elected, also enacted the 16th.
The 17th Amendment allowed senators to be elected by popular vote. Prior to 1913, states elected legislators, and the legislators picked the senators. Problem, it's a lot easier to buy off a legislator than buy off an entire majority of voters, which apparently was an issue at the time.
You know, there were two income taxes prior to the 16th Amendment, and both times the Constitution was upheld. The Supreme Court found them unconstitutional.
Yes, they were unconstitutional based on the way the Constitution was written at the time. That's where amendments come in. The amendments changed the Constitution and made it constitutional. He should know this. Prior to the 14th Amendment, the Supreme Court said that slavery was constitutional. Now it isn't because of the amendment. So, is that wrong? This is basic stuff.
Did you know that the original Constitution forbade the new government from taxing our incomes?
No, income tax is not unconstitutional. The income tax that was proposed was not based on population, which was required by the Constitution at the time, until the 16th Amendment. Income tax is fine. It was the issue with whether or not it was a direct or indirect tax, if it was based on population, a whole bunch of things. Income tax itself, though, not unconstitutional. Not even then.
Of course, got that changed, and hence the 16th Amendment, which allows the federal government to tax our income. So in the short period of time, from the Civil War to the Progressive Era, we went from a government that basically dealt with defending us, delivering the mail, operating the court system, making sure commerce went between the states, to one that would tell us what to eat and what to drink and when to work, what to drink. They even outlawed alcohol, for gosh sakes.
You know what else the government prohibits you from consuming? Heroin. Should we just allow that? Oh, the government says that we can't eat heroin. How dare the government do that? Kind of sounds absurd, right? Oh, but this isn't about heroin. It's about alcohol. Yes, alcohol is also a drug, a potentially dangerous drug. And at the time that it was made illegal, it was considered a very dangerous drug. And it still can be. But when it was made illegal, that caused a lot of problems. And I guess it just wasn't worth it to maintain the illegal status of alcohol. So that was overturned. But he doesn't want you to know that.
The same mentality that changed the way senators were elected, because this crowd believed that it knew what was better for us than what we know is good for ourselves. They chose power over freedom.
Imagine complaining that the government makes too many choices for citizens, and then complaining that citizens didn't want the government to make choices for them, so they changed that government's choice to a popular vote, which I imagine represents those citizens a little bit better. This is the guy. This is the guy that the sovereign citizen has sent to prove me wrong. The only thing it proved is that if Brooklyn Law School has a history or political science professor, he needs to spend more time with them. Hey, sovereign citizens, if you're going to try to prove me wrong, you're going to have to do better than that. I'll wait. Anyway, that's all I have for today. But did you guys know that I have a Patreon where you can support me, and an Etsy where you can support me and get cool things? Just a thought. It's in the description. But until the next time, be good, stay safe.